Hi booktube, Aaron here, hope you're doing very well. Today I've got a bit of a reading update for you. It's going to be a bit of a general update, I think, a bit of a hodgepodge since, well, I've been doing a fair bit of reading, and I might get into it, but I just haven't got that much reading done. I haven't finished many books. A lot of the reading I'm doing at the moment feels very much like I'm going uphill, not in a sort of demoralising way. I'm enjoying what I'm reading, but some of these books are demanding more of my powers, I suppose you could say. And so I'll talk about the one book that I finished since the beginning of the month, but there are a few other things I might talk about, one of them being music. But to start off, I've got a gift that I'd like to show you, that was sent by, very kindly, by one of my subscribers, Mircea. So thank you again, Mircea. And it's a lovely illustration of Marcel Proust, and it was like a two-sided illustration, so I could decide which one was my favourite, and so yeah, I found a frame that fitted. So yeah, it's normally on a shelf just above the desk where I am, so he's sort of looking down on me normally when I'm working here or making videos. So that was really lovely. And then the one book that I finished since the beginning of December, I started it towards the end of November, was the Oristieian Trilogy by Aeschylus, and this is a translation by Philip Vallicott, and I really loved this translation. I thought it was really quite clear. It didn't feel that dusty or old to say that it was from the 1950s, I think. Yeah, the translation was first published in 1956. So yeah, it was really good, and it's instead of being tied down to the specific poetic, the words gone out of my head, sort of verse forms that would have been used in Aeschylus's day. Instead, he's using sort of equivalents for English, so relying more on iambics and things, and so it sort of does feel a little more like English poetry, which is I suppose good, because he doesn't want to make it seem too laborious just for the sake of being more literal to the original, I suppose. So I thought it was really, really good, and yeah, his aim was to get people enthusiastic about his plays, and he's succeeded, at least in my case. It's a great introduction, just sort of going into the context of these three plays, giving you some of the sort of mythological backstory for these characters and what's going on, and then we go straight into the first play, Agamemnon, which is about the house of Agamemnon and his wife, and I'm going to double check that I don't get all the names muddled up. His wife is Clytemnestra, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, sorry, Clytemnestra is his wife, and then he's coming back after the end of the Trojan War, and there's a whole backstory with him. He's the guy who, because the winds weren't in his favour as he was trying to get to Troy, he sacrificed his own daughter to appease the dogs, to appease the gods, and then when he was away, Clytemnestra had an affair with someone else. What's his name? I may as well try and find all the names for you. He's not a massive character, I suppose. Aeschylus, probably not saying that right. And part of the reason why the ships, why the wind wasn't blowing, or why he couldn't get anywhere in his ships, and he had to kill his daughter to appease the gods, was because there's this sort of blood guilt on his family. I think it was his father who was I won't go look up the name for him, but the guy who killed his friend's sons and put them in a pie. I believe I'm remembering the story correctly. And so yeah, there's this sort of blood guilt on the family, but it sort of gets worse with Agamemnon because he's killed his own kin. And one of the really interesting things about this whole cycle of plays is the idea of sort of killing your own kin being worse than any other kind of murder, and that being a very a sort of very primal law in nature that particularly the Furies, who we meet later on in the later plays, they take very, very seriously and sort of feel bound to enact justice on that. And yet it seems like the kind of the way that this blood guilt is being carried out is just more blood being shed, as we see. So Clytemnestra, the whole plot of Agamemnon is her eventually murdering him not long after he's returned from Troy. Agamemnon is very much sort of the most human feeling plays, I suppose, of the three. The next two take more of a supernatural turn. In the second play, the Coephori, I'm probably not saying that right either. It has a subtitle. Is it the libation bringers? And the whole idea with this is that Orestes, so the son of Agamemnon, he's been exiled from I've forgotten where they are, Attica, which is the island that Agamemnon is king of. But yeah, his son Orestes, I can't remember exactly why, but he's been exiled from the island. So he hears that his father's been murdered, and so the sort of setup of the second play, the Zoephori, or the libation bearers. I'll read the sort of scene setting for the beginning of the play. The grave of Agamemnon outside the walls of Argos is a low mound of earth, near which stands a primitive figure of Hermes. Orestes stands by the mound. Pylades a little way off. It is early morning, and there's that. I find it quite haunting image of Orestes there by his father's grave, sort of in the shadow of this figure of Hermes, of this messenger of the gods, and that message is vengeance, is retaliation for the shameful death of his father, and then he's interrupted by the libation bringers, who are among them is Electra, Orestes' sister, and they're bringing libations in as a kind of tribute to Agamemnon, and they're sort of mourning the lack of honour that's been given to him in life, but also in death. With it's just this mound of earth. It's not a kingly grave or anything like that. And Orestes goes and hides, And essentially it's a sort of setup, so that just in case he hasn't really already made up his mind about enacting vengeance on his mother and her lover, then he's sort of getting even more motivation from the libation bearers, who are the chorus, and it's there that for me it gets again a bit more supernatural and a little more creepy as well. I found, because at least in my reading of it, there were points in some of the verses spoken by the chorus where it was almost as if they'd been possessed, either by the ghost of Agamemnon or maybe by a god, or something like that. It becomes very unearthly, and they're presenting a point of view that is very much not the point of view of the kind of everyday people that they're supposed to represent. So that was really quite fascinating. And again, I'm I'm not going to save you from spoilers. And it's probably very easy to guess what goes on in these plays. Orestes then murders his own mother, but then, as I was saying before, he's then broken that very natural law of killing his own kin. So he's killed his own mother, and so the Furies are going after him to torment him for this crime against nature that he's committed. And I do find it interesting that Orestes is punished for this, but Agamemnon isn't, for murdering his own daughter. I think maybe he kind of has the gods a little more on his side by that point, and because he's going off to fight in Troy, maybe. And so he in battle he sort of absolved it. I think that's kind of how the gods see it, which if we were the gods, we maybe wouldn't see it the same way. But then we've got the Eumenides, which again starts in a really, really startling way, with a priestess of the Delphic oracle going into her temple, and she goes in there, and what she sees is Orestes, sort of panting and worn out, all still covered in blood from the murder of his mother, surrounded by the Furies who have been chasing him and tormenting him, and are so tired out from their chase that they're all asleep around him, and she runs out screaming and describes the scene to the audience. But there's someone that this priestess doesn't see in this temple, which is Apollo and Hermes, who have come in because this shrine in at the Delphic oracle is, I think, to Apollo, and essentially he has Apollo's protection, and essentially they go off to Athens to get Athena to essentially be a judge as to whether Orestes should be punished for this act of murdering his mother, or because sort of one side of the gods seems to think that he's enacted out this vengeance, and the other side have seen him as breaking this very natural law of killing a member of his own family. And they sort of quibble about this, and it's all about blood. So if you murder your spouse, it's obviously bad, but the gods, particularly the older gods, and I'll get into this, don't see it as being that bad, because you're not breaking a kind of blood connection. You're not murdering a blood relative. Whereas if you kill your parents or your child or a sibling, then that's suddenly much more transgressive, and that's the kind of transgression that the Furies get really worked up about and want to punish. And essentially, it's essentially a legal case for Orestes amongst the amongst the gods, and eventually, they come to a decision, and he sort of gets off, and the Furies eventually are appeased and are given a new role, they don't have to go around tormenting people anymore. Not too satisfying an ending potentially, but it's really, really satisfying, or really, really intriguing, I should say. This idea of this disagreement between the gods, and it was in the introduction here, where sort of at the time that Aeschylus was writing, he's sort of following this sort of split, I suppose, or maybe not a split, but essentially there were two contending forces in the religion of his day. There was the much older religion, I suppose the religion of almost of the Titans, of the much older gods before the Olympians came in, before Zeus and Athena and Apollo, but gods of much more connected with the earth, with sort of a Mother Earth kind of god, and gods of the underworld, and it's much more a religion of vengeance as well, and this idea of sort of blood curses and things like that were very prevalent in it, but as well there was that sort of connection to sort of the nature of blood ties and of kin, and breaking that was very serious. So that's sort of the one side of it, and then there's the sort of more sky gods, as you might think of them, with Zeus and Apollo and people like that, where they could still be very changeable. They may still enact or demand vengeance, but they don't seem quite as dark and mysterious as these older gods, and the sort of question of which gods they're going to decide to stick with, for them at that time very much came down to a question of what is justice, because there wasn't this split between the secular and the sacred that I suppose we have today, and so which gods you're serving, it very much demands what kind of justice that you're going to enact in your society, and what you're going to uphold in your society, and these plays are an exploration of that, and ultimately the Athenian or Olympian gods, the gods we think of as being the Greek gods, win out, and yet you get to see the sort of brutal primal power and fury of some of these older gods. So there's something really I find really sort of interesting about that exploration, and there's I don't know, it gives me a really sort of unsettled feeling that I haven't quite worked out, but I'm really intrigued by it. So there are some thoughts about the Oristieian trilogy. This was my first look into Greek tragedy, into any Greek drama, and I'll be certainly reading some more, and I expect I'll be rereading this again, probably within a few months. At some point early next year, I'll be reading this again, and that's all that I've read. But it's been a while since I finished it, but it's still sort of fresh in my mind, and I'm still sort of turning it over and working out what I think about it. Currently going at the moment, sort of the bulk of my attention is focused on Solenoid by Mircea Cărtărescu, really interesting. I'll let you know what I think. It's it is a lot. I've been reading the selected poems of Wallace Stevens. Me and my friend Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics. We've sort of put together a list of poems by Stevens that we'd like to read and discuss, and so I'm sort of making my way through this and going back and rereading the poems that we might be discussing. We're going slowly but surely. It's been very informal, which is fine. And also I've been reading the Western Canon by Harold Bloom, which has very much been demanding attention, and it's got me rethinking things and working things out. And again, I'll get to my thoughts on Bloom, and particularly this book, which, yeah, I think for a lot of people, I mean, there's certainly a lot to admire, but yeah, it's I suppose it provokes rather complex reactions, and so that's all I'm reading at the moment. I might hopefully finish Solenoid soon, but I couldn't really count on finishing it before towards the end of the month. And so I think I might just talk for 5 minutes or so about my music listening and my listening in general. Mainly, as a sort of response to Spotify Wrapped and all these other Wrapped things you sort of seem to see with streaming services and music providers and whatever. And it's really, it's really satisfying on one, on the one hand, and yet on the other hand, it's because it's all based on quantity, on the amount of times you listen to things over the course of a year. It obviously can't pick up on the things that were maybe meaningful and the things that stood out. And so I was sort of really interested and really sort of quite pleased with the list of top songs and whatever that came up for me. Some artists that I really loved, some that were quite new to me this year, particularly a Norwegian double bassist and singer called Ellen Andrea Wang, who's there's an album by her called Closeness, which is really good, and a follow-up album called Closeness 2, which is amazing if you're into jazz. But so there have been some fun discoveries there that it turned out I'd listened to quite a lot. Looking at the podcasts, it was a sort of nice reminder to see where my interests lie. I only really listen to 4 podcasts regularly, which are the Empire podcast, based on the recommendation of Mark from Book Time with Elvis. I listened to The Rest is History with Tom Holland and I've forgotten the name of the co-host. Is it Anthony something? Maybe it isn't. But then there's the history of literature as well, and the history of Byzantium. The history of Byzantium I've not been listening to that much this year. I think I need to. I do need to dive back into sort of Byzantine history at some point. I've not really been following up on that this year. But it's just interesting to see where my interests lie there. They're mainly historical, and with the sort of history of literature in there as well. And I don't know. It's all based on how often and how many times you've listened to something, and so I was just looking back over the year, not looking at how often I'd listened to certain things, but instead looking back at certain moments that seemed interesting, and that stood out. right at the beginning of the year, I can remember just being sat and getting a song by Squeeze stuck in my head, and I went down a massive Squeeze rabbit hole. And as I was listening to them, I was listening to the lead vocalist's voice, and I was just thinking how it kind of reminded me of Neil Finn from Crowded House. And then it sort of reminded me that I hadn't listened to any Crowded House this year, and so then I went and I was listening to albums by then that I hadn't listened to before, and things like that, and that was maybe one of my favourite moments quite early in the year. These sort of two rabbit holes of first getting into Squeeze, and then it sort of being totally drowned out by Crowded House. And then much later on in the year, I suppose a similar rabbit hole moment of just deciding to spend some time listening to more Kate Bush and listening to albums of hers in their entirety, and again discovering albums by her that I hadn't really listened to before, particularly the Sensual World, which at least for me really stands out, and I'd say those two are two really lovely bookends to my year in my music listening that weren't really picked up that much by Spotify Wrapped. So a bit of an unformed ramble there about music. I maybe should have made some notes about what I've been listening to, but a lot of it is the same old stuff because I've just sort of started sort of collecting lots of instrumental jazz pieces, and that's sort of grown into a playlist that I put on when I don't know what else to listen to. Uh, and so then when it comes to how often I'm listening to things, it's going to be a lot of that stuff, and yeah, it's not always the stuff that stands out. So yeah, I'm not sure if that made any sense. So on that confused and rambly note, I think I'll leave it there. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye bye.